はい、今日もですね、引き続き、詩編のシリーズ、いろんな詩編の箇所を見ながらですね、あることを学んでいきたいと思います。
And today we're just going to be continuing in our series in Psalms, just kind of jumping around to a lot of different things and talking about kind of different topics based off of the Psalms.
はい、先週はですね、詩編139編を見て、神様の教理、神様という存在はどういう存在なのか、そのことについて学びました。
And if you remember from last week, we talked about Psalm 139, it talks about kind of like the doctrine of God and just about God and who He is.
もしその、メッセージを聞いてない方がいればビデオでですね見れますのでオンラインでぜひ聞いてみてください。
If you haven't looked at it or heard it yet, you can always check it out online.
今日はですね、それに紐づいていく内容で私たち人間の存在、人間とは人とは何なのか、そこを理解していきたいと思います。
And so today, kind of connected to that, we want to talk today about like what is a human being, like who are we?
それを詩編の8編からですねずっとやっていきたいと思います。
And we want to look at that through Psalm chapter 8.
はい、全部ですね。はい。
All of Psalm 8, yes.
なのでいつも通りで日本語で、1節から9節までですね全部ですね日本語だけで見えますので英語の方は自分の聖書を開いて、見るかまたは、このスクリーンの方を見ていただければ嬉しいです。
And as always, we're going to be reading the text in Japanese only, so if you're an English speaker, you can either follow along on the screen here or in your own Bible.
じゃあ日本語で1節から読みます。主よ、私たちの主よ、あなたの皆は全地にわたりなんと力に満ちていることでしょう。あなたのご意向は天で称えられています。幼子たち、父の御子たちの口を通してあなたは道からを打ち立てられました。あなたに敵対する者に応えるために、復讐する敵を鎮めるために、あなたの指の技であるあなたの天、あなたが整えられた月や星を見るに人とは何者なのでしょうか。あなたが心に留められるとは、人の子とは一体何者なのでしょう。あなたが顧みてくださるとは、あなたは人を御使いよりわずかに欠けているものとし、これに栄光と誉れの冠をかぶらせてくださいました。あなたの御手の技を人に収めさせ、万物を彼の足の下に置かれました。羊も牛もすべて、また野の獣も空の鳥、海の魚、海路を通うものも、主よ、私たちの主よ、あなたの皆は全地にわたりなんと力に満ちていることでしょう。ちょっと待ってくださいね、電池を変えていますはい、皆さん自分が誰かって聞いたことありますか？解いたことありますか？
So have you kind of asked yourself before, like, who am I?
みんなあると思います。
I think everybody has at some point.
私たち人間って何なんでしょうか？
Like, what are we as humans?
ある人はいや動物と同じ生き物、何の変わりもない生き物だという人もいます。
A lot of people kind of think like, oh, we're just like basically the same as animals. There's nothing really different from us in
でも
that way.
本当にそうでしょうか？
But is that really true?
私たち自分という存在を知るにはまず人間という存在がどのように作られ、どういう存在として神様に立たられているのか、そこを理解する必要があると思います。
I think to really understand like who we are as humans, we have to really understand like how have we been created by God and how have we been kind of made to function in this world.
そしてこの疑問、質問は私たち現代人だけの質問じゃないです。何千年も前にダビデ王、彼も同じ問いを4節で解いてますよね。人とは何なんだろうって投げかけています。
Yeah, and this isn't just something that like we started thinking about in the kind of modern era. This is something that people have always asked about over thousands of years. Like David asks the same thing in verse 4, where he's like what is man?
ね、ダビデはまず神様の創造物を見て、神様の作ったものすべてを見て、でも私たちこのちっぽけな存在、神様が気にかけてくれている存在、何なんだろうって言ってるんです。
He's saying like he's looking at all of the things that God has made, all of the heavens, all of creation, and looking at all these things that God has made, but then saying, but still like what is man? Like who am I that you should like pay attention to me?
それを知りたくないですか、皆さん？
Like don't you guys want to know
自
more
分
of
を
what
知り
that
たくない
is?
でしょうか？
Like do you really want to know more of like yourself, who you really are?
はい、なので今日3つのポイントを通して、それを見ていきます。
So just kind of talking about that, we're going to look at this in 3 points today.
はい、まず最初、神様を反映する存在ということでやっていきます。
So the first point is kind of people who reflect or kind of carry God's glory.
はい、そして2番目、神に敵対するもの。
And then the second point is kind of the enemies of God, those who are against God.
そして真の人間として生きること、真の人間であることを見ていきます。
And the third point is kind of becoming and being a true human.
はい、 最初のポイント、5節にこう書いてあります。あなたは人を御使いよりを天使たちよりもわずかにかけてちょこっと劣っているものとし、これに栄光の誉れの冠をかぶらせてくださいましたって書いてあります。
Going into the first point, if we look at verse 5 of the text, it says, Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor.
どういうことでしょうか。
So what does that mean?
この聖書箇所、今日全体読んだところをよく見ていくと、どこかの他の聖書箇所を思い起こしませんか。
So when you look at this part and you kind of think about the Bible in this context and kind of like a bigger picture, like does it kind of make you think of maybe a different part of Scripture?
地を這うもの、魚、鳥、天地、そういう表現が出てきますよね。
Like there's this kind of expressions of like the things that are creeping along the ground or like the things in the sky and all of these different parts of creation.
羊、牛、そういう他の動物、野の獣とかそういう表現も出てきます。
And it's all of these kind of expressions of like the sheep and like the cows and like all these different kind of beasts of the field and stuff.
どこでしょうか。皆さん覚えてますか。
So like where does this kind of also remind you of?
創世記1章2章です。
Yeah, it's especially Genesis 1 and 2.
おそらくダビデは創世記を想定しながら人の存在について考えています。
So it's possible that David was even like as he was writing this was thinking about Genesis 1 and 2.
神様の栄光の冠をかぶせられているイコール神様のイメージに私たちは作られているということです。
So when it says that we are kind of crowned with glory and honor by God, it also we could say that we are kind of made to reflect God and His image.
私たちの人間のまず性質は神様の栄光、神様の存在の繁栄です。
And so we as humans, we are this kind of existence that is made to reflect the glory of God.
でもちょっと待って、動物たちも神様の栄光を反映してるってここで言ってないと思うかもしれません。
But then you might think like, well, wait, doesn't it say that the animals and stuff, they also reflect God because they're His creation?
神様の力、神様の栄光は全地に満たされてるって書いてありますよね。
Doesn't it say that like the glory of God just like fills the whole creation?
じゃあ何が違うのと思います。
So then what's the actual difference then?
このように考えてみてください。
So think about it this way.
例えば僕が自分の似顔絵、まあ何でもいいです。アートを自分の手で描いたとしましょう。
So let's say, for example, that Pastor Rita decides to kind of do like a self-portrait with some kind of art medium. It doesn't matter what kind of art. He just decides to draw himself or paint himself.
その絵には僕のキャラクター、ある意味僕の性格、僕のある意味個性が絵に反映されます。
And so in this picture, kind of however he draws it, his character, all of his quirks, all of the different kind of aspects of himself are reflected in what he paints or draws.
そうですよね。でも私が描く絵は私が使う鏡とは全く違うものです。もちろん少し、ね、絵は私たちは自分のキャラを反映しますけども、鏡の前に自分を立てた時に鏡はその生き写しです。わかりますか、その違い。
Yeah, but if you compare that to a mirror, if he stands in front of a mirror, the mirror is going to show him exactly what he looks like rather than like, oh, this thing that kind of reminds me of him because he made it.
もちろん神様が創造した神様の指や神様の手で、創造したその全ての創造物には神様のキャラクター、神様の栄光がもちろんにじみ出ています。
And so of course in all of creation, all of the animals, all the plants, everything has like an aspect of God's character in it because they're all things that are made by God.
でも私たち人間は神様の栄光のそのままの反映なんです。
But we as humans, we are more like in the sense of like the mirror where we are made to reflect exactly what God's essence is.
これとてつもないことです。
So this is a very big difference. This is a very important thing here.
本来だったら私たちはお互い見るときに神様を見なくちゃいけないんです。
So when we actually think about like who we are as human beings, we need to look at like who God is.
神様の栄光を見れるようになってなくちゃいけないわけです。
Because we have to actually be able to see God's glory.
それだけじゃなくて人間はその神様を見ながら反映しながら、そして創造物、動物も含め周りの人たちにも含めそれに仕える、そのようなユニークなポジションにいます。
And so as humans, we have this unique position where we are made to reflect exactly the glory of God, but then at the same time to look out towards the rest of creation and to like have this dominion over it, as it says.
神様のそのままのクリエイティビティ、イメージ、神様のある意味思考です。そういうものも反映させながらクリエイティビティを持って世界、創造物に仕える、そういう役割です。
And so we have this special role to really reflect even the creativity of God as we are this unique position that then can have dominion over the rest of the world and kind of have this domination or controlling over
だから
it.
6節に神様の御手の技を治めるものだって書いてあります。
And that's why it says in verse 6, you have given him dominion over the works of your hands.
私たちはこの質問、私たちさっき言いましたよね、人とは何だろうっていう考えることすら動物にはできないことです。
So even like the question that we all ask, what am I? What are we as humans? Like animals don't even ask that question.
僕、猫がうちにいます。
So Pastor Rita has a cat in his
また
home.
チワワも、めっちゃ可愛いチワワもいます。猫はちょっと出てちゃいましたけども、今チワワだけが残ってますけども。
And he also has a Chihuahua.
はい。一度もチワワも猫も僕のところに来て、私って誰って聞いたことないです。
So never do this cat or this Chihuahua come to him and be like, what am I? They don't do that.
質問すらしないですよね。
They don't even ask questions.
カエル君がこの間ね大丈夫あるビデオサイエンスビデオを見てたらしいです。
I watched a science video.
はい。そしてですねそのチンパンジーのことで研究してたらしいんですね。
And yeah, it was this video about they were like doing this research with chimpanzees.
はい。そしたらですね彼らが気づいたことは動物もちろん彼はコミュニケーション能力はあります。
And they have this kind of communication. They were teaching them like sign language and stuff.
お互いになんていうんですか言葉を使わずともなんかそういう感じでですねコミュニケーションを取れるわけですね。イルカもテレパシーみたいなそんなあれもできますよね。そういうコミュニケーション能力ありますよね。
And so like there is a kind of a level of communication that animals have, making the different sounds, or even like there's almost like a telepathy type thing with dolphins and stuff
で
apparently.
も質問するってことができないんです。
But they don't ask questions. There's never been an animal that asks a question.
私たちのように複雑な言葉というものを駆使してクリエイティブに自分の思い自分の考えを表現できる能力はないんです。
And so they don't have this kind of creative side of like I want to actually understand things and ask things and actually use the kind of giftings I have to like do more like in-depth kind of creative or asking questions of different types of
人
things.
間の存在のまず第一は神様の存在、神様の想像力、神様の思考、神様の計画、神様のクリエイティビティ、すべてを反映する役割です。
And so humans have this special role of they are made to really reflect all of God's kind of creative power and all of these different aspects of God in their role. Like that's
私
kind
た
of,
ちは猿でもチンパンジーから生まれたわけでもありません。
so it's not that we just like slowly started existing out of chimpanzees or something over time.
冠っていうある意味王族にされている。わかります？ロイヤル。そういう存在として特別に置かれてるんです。
And so when it says like we are crowned with glory and honor, it's really like we are kind of this special creation that God has made.
もしそうであるならいろんなもしそれが事実ならそして私たちがそのような自覚を持って生きているならいろんな面で私たちの生き方が変わります。
And so if we actually really understand this and actually truly live this out, it's actually going to affect the way we live in a lot of different ways.
例えば精神面、霊的面でかなり影響があります。
Especially like just thinking like mentally or kind of spiritually, it really affects those areas.
世の中はどうやって自分というものを作っていますか？
And so if we just think about the world, like, and they think about like how do we exist as humans, like how do they make ourselves, like what happens?
比
How
べ
would
て
they
みて
answer
くださ
that?
い。クリスチャンは神様からアイデンティティをもらう存在です。
So if you think about it, for Christians, they would think like, okay, we have our identity from God. God has created us. That's
私
who we
たち
are.
クリスチャン、ある意味、人間そうですけども本来の私たちの生き方は神様に心の鏡を向け神様をそのまま反映するそのような生き方です。
And so, Christian, really, but anybody, but the Christian would answer like, we are made to reflect the glory of God.
Like a mirror.
Like a mirror. Yeah.
言ってるわかります。でも多くの人たちはどうやって生きてますか？
But then for a lot of people, for most people in the world, like how would they answer this question? How would they live?
彼らは自分の心の鏡を創造物に向けて創造されたもの、要は創造主ではなくて創造されたもので何とか自分のイメージを形成しようとしています。
They basically take this same kind of mirror of their heart, and instead of pointing it at God, their creator, they point it at some other random created thing to kind of get an identity by reflecting that.
だからローマの一章で書いてあります。人間たちは神様から離れて何ですか？這うもの、この世の獣のイメージに自分の見姿を変えてしまって愚かになったって言ってます。
And that's why Paul says in Romans 1 that it's kind of like almost like foolish with the people. They basically started orienting their hearts towards like the creeping things of the earth or all these other beasts, and they basically just started focusing on that instead.
現代人はこう言います。自分を見つけたいなら自分の心の中を見よう。自分自身を見ましょうって言います。
Especially like in the modern era, we kind of often say like, I need to find myself. I need to go deep into myself and find my true self and bring that out.
でも考えてみてください。自分の中に何がありますか？
But if you look back deep into inside yourself, like what's actually there?
これよく言われる話です。自分の鏡を、ね、自分の姿を前にして 私は誰、私は誰、私は誰、私は誰、ずっと聞き続けると、気違いになっていくって、そういうよくことを言われます。
And it's actually said like if you just like kind of stand in front of a mirror and you're constantly just like who am I, who am I, who am I, you're never really going to go anywhere. Just kind of
ゲシュタルト崩壊っていうらしいです。自分が失っていく。
You basically just kind of actually lose yourself more than find yourself.
ある意味それはある意味正しいと思います。なぜなら私たちは自分を形成するベース、土台っていうものを自分の中に持ってないんです。
And it actually makes sense that that would happen because there isn't any kind of base or foundation that you can actually form yourself, and that's why it just kind of turns into
私た
nothing.
ちの存在意義は神からもらうもの、外からもらうものです。
And that's because that our actual kind of foundation is something that we receive from outside of ourselves to be
だ
able
か
to
らい
exist.
くら内側を見ようとしても、自分の感情を見つめても、自分の思考を見つめても、どこにも行かないんです。
Yeah, so as much as you just kind of just continue to gaze at your own feelings or your own kind of thinking, you're never going to actually like find anything new by doing that.
僕はクリスチャンじゃない頃、もちろんそのような生き方をしていました。
And of course, before Pastor Joe was a Christian, was kind of living more in that way.
僕覚えてる限りですよ。覚えてる限り僕が心の鏡を向けていた存在は漫画のキャラです。まず最初。
And for him, a lot of times the way that he would orient the mirror of his heart was towards like different like manga characters and
まあ
stuff.
孫悟空かもしれませんし、はい。
Yeah, like Goku apparently, or
その後はスト2のキャラクターでした。ストリートファイターのキャラクター。
yeah, or like the Street Fighter characters.
でその後はキングオブファイターズって皆さん、そういうゲーム知ってますか？知らないかな？まあそういうキャラクターでし
But
た。
then after Street Fighter, then King of Fighters came out. I think they have a stage in Super
で
Smash.
その
You
頃
might
の
know
写真
it. Yeah.
皆さんに見せたら、いやこいつ絶対このキャラコピーしてるだろうってそういう格好をしてるの分かると思います。
So like a lot of times it's like, oh, like you're like trying to copy their kind of style or something, try to look like that character.
もうちょっと大人になったら何になったでしょうか？
But then maybe you could become a little bit more of an adult. But then what does it turn into at that
イギリ
point?
スに行ってイギリスのロックバンドファンになりました。
But then for him, he went to England, and then he like got interested in all of like the English rock bands and stuff.
ね、ノエル・ギャラガーだとか分かります？オエシスのそういう髪型をし始めてそういう格好をし始めました。
Yeah, so Oasis or other like such guys, and he would try to like make his hair maybe look kind of like them, and put the
次
mirror
か
to
ら
like those
次
guys.
へのイメージと変えてるに過ぎないんです。
And so basically, you're just constantly like just changing your image to be exactly like theirs. You just change to be like them.
From イメージとイメージね。
From just another image, yeah.
そして私たちはそれをあたかも自分が成長してるって錯覚を受けます。
And then we actually kind of we kind of get disillusioned into thinking that, oh, we're actually growing, we're actually changing when we
じ
do
ゃあ
that.
結局子供でも大人でも同じことの繰り返しをしてるだけなんですよ。
But it's actually really just kind of repeating the same thing over and over again. And you're not actually growing or changing
外からイメージをもらってるに過ぎないんです。
because you're just kind of getting some other image from some other outside created thing.
仕事に自分のイメージを持ち、人間関係に自分の恋愛に自分のイメージを持とうとし、インスタグラムの何か一番フォロワーを持ってる人に自分のイメージを見出そうとし、その連続です。
And so it's just this constant cycle of like you're trying to get that from your job, from your relationships, from like a romantic relationship, or just like how many followers you have on Instagram. You're always just kind of trying to get that identity from these different things, and it's just
でも、
continuing.
もし私たちがこの世で一番優れた存在に似てるって自覚できたらどうでしょうか？
But if we actually knew, like, no, you're actually reflecting like the highest like thing, and like the highest being in existence. If that's where you're actually reflecting, if we actually truly understood that, like, how would that change us?
皆さん最近女性で有名な女性なんですか
Who's that famous girl recently?
セレブリティ誰でも
Some
いいです。
celebrity? Oh, anybody?
石原さとみはちょっと古いですね。最近誰ですか？最近誰？ドラマ見てる人。
Anybody watching the dramas? Who's like the famous girl right now?
知ってる？はい、知ってるそうですね。はい。じゃあもし花部めなみさんにあなた似てますねって女性言われたらどう思いますか？
So if somebody said like you look like this, some Minami, some girl. If somebody said, I don't know who this is. If somebody told, especially for the girls, like, oh, you look like this girl. Like, how would that make you
嬉し
react?
くなりますよね。
Like,
ちょっと自信、そう私ってそんなに美人だったってそういう自
you
信
know,
がで
you
きま
might
す
be
よ
like,
ね。
wow, me? Like, I look like that? Oh my God. Like, you know.
まあ男性は多分ね一生キムタクっていうそういうのが出てくる。もしあなたがキムタクに似てるってまあそれでもちょっと古いかもしれません。僕はごめんなさい昭和の人間なんで同世代なんで、まあ他のハンサムガイ最近いますか？はい。レン君に似てるって言われたら男性まあそんなに若く見えるかなってねおじさんですら嬉しくなりますよ。
Yeah, or if you look like all these other famous guys that I also don't know, then even maybe if you're older, you might be like, wow, I look like young and hip like this guy. Like, wow, I'm pretty cool.
でも
Like, you
も
might
し
think that.
あなたがそんなレベルじゃないです。そんなサラブリティ程度のレベルじゃなくて、全宇宙のこの世界全宇宙で一番美しい方に似てるねって言われたら、どんな自信が生まれてくると思います？
But like, what kind of confidence would come out of you if you were told like, hey, you actually kind of look like the most like awesome and amazing and beautiful existence in the universe?
とてつもない自信ができます。
Like, wouldn't you have this just crazy kind of confidence coming out of you?
それが本来の人間の生き方なんです。とてつもない自信を持って生きれるんです。
And so this is actually how we were originally designed to be as humans.
でもそうではなく、私たちの科学に頼ってしまいます。科学はこう言います。あなたは偶然の産物です。
Yeah, but we kind of have lost that, and we just kind of go into like a scientific only way of looking at it, where you just kind of are a random amalgamation of
石
molecules and
と
stuff.
同じ存在ですと。
You're basically the same as a rock. It's just like a little bit like you move a little bit more.
生物学的にはある意味うんちと同じ要素でできていますと。
And basically, if you think about it, just as like materials only, it's like basically not really any different from poop.
そしたらどこに自分を作れるんでしょうか。
So then, like, what are you then using to make yourself?
要は矛盾してるんですよ。私たちの生き方は神なしで。
Like this kind of lifestyle of like thinking without God is very contradictory,
自分
actually.
見つかるわけないんです。神様なしで。
Because like there's no other way to like actually find yourself without God.
でも私たちが神の栄光を持っている存在として自覚できたら自分だけじゃないです。人間関係が変わります。
Because if we actually have this kind of identity from God, it actually affects so many things in all of our relationships as well.
今まで憎んできた人たちを見る目が変わります。その人が神様の栄光を持ってるんですよ。そしたらどういう接し方になるべきでしょうか。
Because if you actually, there's somebody that maybe you didn't like before, you kind of hated them, but then you realize like, oh, this person is made in the image of God. How is that going to affect how I approach this person, how I
リ
actually
ス
interact
ペク
with
ト
them?
リスペクトできるはずです。
Because you actually be able to come to respect them even if you have
ど
a
んな
problem with them.
小さな存在、不老者でもホームレスの人でも弱い存在、彼らを見た時ですら、いや、同じ神の栄光を持ってる存在だってリスペクトできるはずです。
Yeah, so any kind of like vagabond or any kind of like weak person who doesn't have like a house or any of these kind of maybe people in lower positions in society, like you can really respect like, oh, no, this person's made in the image of God.
だから2節でダビデ言ってます。あなたは幼子を通して、幼子の口、一番弱い存在の口を通してあなたの力を表しました。要は赤ちゃんですら、どんなちっちゃい弱い人ですら神の栄光を持ってるんです。
Yeah, and that's why it even says in verse 2, like out of the mouths of babies and infants you have established strength. Like out of even the weakest people, like God's glory is reflected in them. And
要は人間関係、コミュニティから逃げてるなら、あなたは、私たちは神の栄光からある意味目をそらしてるんです。
And so in a sense, if you're kind of always trying to run away from relationships, it's kind of like you're always like diverting your eyes away from God's glory.
はい。私たちの存在、神の栄光を持ってる。じゃあそれだけなんでしょうか。
So like is that it? Like are we just like, okay, there it is, you're supposed to reflect God's
私た
glory
ち
at
は
the
素晴
end?
らしい、私たちはもう完璧、そこに戻ろう、神様に愛されてる、それで終わりなんでしょうか。
Is it really just like, okay, that's how you're supposed to be made, like that's great, and let's just go back to that at the end? Like is that how we're
いや、
doing
ダ
this
ビデ
now?
はもう一つの人間の性質をここで言ってくれてます。
There's actually another kind of important aspect of being human that David talks about in this
それ
passage.
は2節の神様の敵というあり方です。
And that is kind of what it says in verse 2 of like being an enemy, being a foe of
でも
God.
ある人は言うかもしれない。いやいや、これダビデは自分の敵のことだけを言ってるんじゃないのって。
But a lot of people might think like, oh, well, that's just David talking about like his own foes, his own enemies.
いや、詩編の14編、少し後です。見てみると、ダビデはこのように歌っています。
But actually in Psalm 14, this is how David says
同
it.
じダビデです。同じダビデが人間についてこれを言うように言ってるん
Yeah,
です
this is how David said about like the same David talking about other people.
愚か者は心の中で神はいないという。彼らは腐っていて、すごい表現ですね。腐ってるんです。腐っていて忌まわしいことを行う。善を行う者はいない。主は天から人の子を見下ろされた。悟る者、神を求める者がいるかどうかを、すべての者が離れていき、誰も彼も無用の者となった。善を行う者もいない。誰一人いないって書いてあります。
And it says The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one.
ダビデは人間の存在素晴らしくできている、神の栄光を持っている、そのような存在であると同時にとてつもなく真逆を言っています。
So at the same time that David is saying like humans are this great and special and wonderful existence that have been created to reflect the glory of God, at the same time they're also like this very like corrupt and it's the complete opposite thing at the same time.
腐ってるって言ってます。
Basically, the Japanese is more like they are rotten.
神様の栄光を反映できない存在になってるって言ってます。
They're becoming an existence that is not able to actually reflect God's glory anymore.
2つ言っています。神を求める者がいない。
And then he's also saying like there is no one who actually seeks God, whoever actually
そし
desires
て
God.
正しいことをする人誰もいない。
And there is no one who does good.
えって思いません？
Like, wait, what?
ちょっと待って。
Like, hold on a second.
神様求めてる人いっぱいいるんじゃないって思いません？
Like, aren't there like a lot of people who are like trying to find God out there?
僕そう思いました。
That's what I thought as well.
僕はクリスチャンになる前、考古学が大好きでした。
And especially for Pastor Jim, before he was a Christian, he was really interested in like, all of
Archaeology.
these archaeology, yeah.
なんかいろんなミステリーが大好きでした。
Especially like all of those kind of like archaeological, I can't
ちょっとここ
mysteries and
暑いで
stuff
すか？
about that stuff, yeah.
ここちょっと暑いですか皆さん。
Is it
ちょっ
a
と
little
クーラ
hot
ー
in
かけて
here?
もらって Can you put a little bit of みんな寝ちゃってるんで
You guys look sleepy.
ちょっと暑いのは分かります。まあ、ドアを開けといてもいいかもしれないですね。はい、まあいいや。はい。あれ何言ってたっけ？
Something about archaeology
Archaeology.
and the mysteries of archaeology.
もうミステリーが大好きでした。いろんな。
And really like kind of like all of like the mysteries and stuff
皆
from
さん、
like ancient.
ムーっていう雑誌を知ってます？ムー。
There's a magazine called Moo.
なんかいつもピラミッドのあれが載ってる。
It has like a
なんかいつも
pyramid.
宇宙人だとかこの世の七不思議だとかそんなこと変なこと言ってる。知らない？
So it's like this magazine about this kind of all this, you know,
今
like
でも売ってます。はい。
aliens from the past, like they made the
もうとに
pyramids and
か
all that kind of
く
stuff.
とにかくもう神秘を見つけたかったんです。この世の神秘を。
He's just really interested in all of this kind of like mysterious kind of stuff.
で僕は神様を探してるって思ってました。
And he thought like, oh yeah, I'm really like I'm looking for God in this. I'm trying to find it all.
でもクリスチャンになった後本当に考えてみると本当に俺は神様を求めてたんだろうかって。
But then after like becoming a Christian, I thought about it more. It's like, was I really seeking God in all of those things?
そうでしょうか？
Was that really what I
い
was
や違
doing?
います。僕は世の中のシークレットですよね。秘密を知ることで自分が誰よりも知性を持っている人間。わかります？世の中の秘密を知っている人間としてなりたかっただけです。
There's actually he realized that it was more just like if I could just figure out all of these like secrets of the universe and stuff, then I'll have more knowledge than other people, and that'll make me better.
私たちもある意味みんな同じなんです。神様に祈りますもちろん。でも神を求めてるんでしょうか？それとも神がくれるものまたは神にくっついているものを求めてるんでしょうか？
You know, so it's the same thing with all of us. Like we pray to God, we ask for these things, but do we really want God, or do we just want like the things that He would give us that are just incidental to knowing Him?
皆さん神社に行ったことあると思います。でも何を祈ってますか？良い仕事をください。お金をください。結婚相手をください。神様自身じゃなくて自分が欲しいものを求めてるだけなんです。
You know, it's the same thing. Like if you go to a shrine, like you usually just go and you pray, like, oh, give me a good job, give me some more money, get me like a good marriage relationship. You're not actually going there because you want the God.
本当に神様だけを求めてる人は一人もいないんです。
And so it's saying like there's no one who actually wants God.
宗教もそうです。すべての宗教そうです。良いことをすれば神様に認められる。どういう原理でしょうか？天国に行きたいだけです。
Yeah, and so it's the same in all religions too. It's like, what do you have to do to get to heaven? If you do this thing, then you can get to heaven. It's not actually because you want God or anything.
ただ人生幸せになって楽になりたいだけですよ。
And so it's just like for people who just want to have like a happy life.
まあそれを分かった。皆さん思うかもしれません。
And so, you know, you might kind of already be like, yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
でも日本人、次のダビデが言ってること、めちゃくちゃ受けがたいと思います。誰も正しいことをしている人はいない。
Yeah, and then the next part where it says, especially for Japanese people, it might really be really hard to understand to accept, where it says like there is no one who does good.
えって思いません？
Like what?
いやいや、この間僕 優先席に座ってて、おばあちゃんが来たから譲ったよって、それいいことじゃないですか、皆さん。
Yeah, you might be like, oh yeah, but like last week I was sitting in the priority seat and then this Obasan came in and then like I just gave up the seat immediately. That's a great thing, right? I did
どういう
that.
ことしてる人いるでしょ。
Like there's people who do that all the time, right?
そうですよね。僕にとってのいいことは、この間うちの奥さんの何したんだって覚えてないや、とにかく褒められました。何かをして褒められました。
So for Shrita, I guess a little while ago, he did something for his wife. He doesn't remember what it was, but she was really happy about it. So he did something good for her.
昨日もそうだよね。昨日ね、しおんちゃんが靴ずれしてて、絆創膏なかったんですね。でも男性ですよ。男性の僕が絆創膏をお財布の中に入れていたんですよ。
Or another example, I guess yesterday Shion had kind of like a blister on her foot, and then she didn't have any like the little band-aids for it or something, and
そしてそれを渡したらしおんちゃんに、もうこれは英語で Dad of the Year って感じね。もう今年一番のお父さん像みたいな。でもそれは1年間の期限ね。1年間だけはそういうふうに見てあげるってそういう条件付きでしたけども、いいことしてませんか皆さん。
Yeah, and then but then Pastor Rita, he had like the bandage in his wallet and he got it out and he gave her the bandage for her blister, and then she's like, oh, like you're gonna be Dad of the Year now, and I'm gonna make you Dad of the Year, but it's only for 1 year. But she did this great thing. She made him Dad of the Year for 1 year.
もちろんそれらはいいことです。
And of course, like that's a good thing. That's a great thing.
そして人々がそれをしなければこの世の中はもっと悪い状態になってます。もちろん。
Yeah, and like of course, like if we kind of lost this as like a society, of course the world would get worse.
でももうちょっと深く考えてみましょう。
But like think about it just a little bit more deeply.
本当に良いことだけのために良いことをしてるんでしょうか。
Like, are we really doing that good thing for that good thing, like for that good thing in and of itself?
例えば席を譲るとき、僕正直言います。席を譲るときね、まず最初プレッシャーがあります。
You know, for example, with like the giving up your seat on the train thing, like it's usually like, if you're honest, it's like, well, there's kind of pressure if you don't
ロ
do
ン毛
that.
でしかも全然おじいちゃんに見えない僕がここに座ってて、そして目の前におばあさんが立っている。絶対これいい状況、見栄えじゃないと思いませんよ、皆さん。
You know, especially it's like, you know, somebody who just like looks really young and genki and they're sitting down and then this obasan sitting or standing right in front of you, like that doesn't look very good, right? So it's
周
like,
り
oh,
の
I have
目
to move for
が
that.
気になります。
And it's more like, oh, I care how other people like feel
いや
about
こ
the
こで立っ
situation.
て譲らなかったら俺は嫌な若者として見られる。だから譲ろうっていう動機ちょこっとあります、皆さん。
And so there's this motivation of like, well, people around me are going to look at me and be like, oh, this young guy isn't really respecting society, and so that's not good, and I don't want to be thought about that way, so I'm going to
ま
move
た
for that.
はそれをやることで俺ってモラル的に素晴らしい人間だなって思うためにやる人もいるかもしれません。
Or it's like, because if you do the thing, then you'll be like, yeah, I'm pretty good. Like I did that. I gave up that seat for that person. And it's like you do it for that kind of
要
satisfaction.
は正しい善をすることで自分のある意味価値形成をしてるんです。
And so in a sense, it's like from doing this kind of good work, you're trying to form your own value.
アフリカの子供たちを助ける、それ素晴らしいことです。でもそれをすることで役に立っている自分が出来上がります。
Yeah, and so, you know, of course, like helping maybe children in Africa who really need the help, of course they need help, and that's a great thing to do. But in a sense, you're kind of doing it so that you can kind of form your own identity as like a good person who does good things for
別の
people.
言い方をすると私たちは良いことを通して自分を形成しようとしてるんです。根本的に。
And basically, fundamentally, we're just trying to form our own identity, form ourselves by doing good things.
自分のイメージを探してるんです。
We're just kind of trying to search for an image for our identity.
良いことも悪いことも通して。
Through doing good things or through doing bad things.
これ日本人にチャレンジです。
I think this is a challenge, especially to Japanese
日
people.
本人は特に周りの目というものに自分のイメージを作ろうとするから
I
で
think
す。
especially for a lot of Japanese people, there's kind of like the tendency to look towards what other people are viewing them as.
自分が正しい人間じゃないと思いたくないんです。
Because they don't want to be thought of as somebody who is not good, who is
でも
not right.
ある人はいやそれはちょっと人間を落とし込みすぎですよ。人間に対してちょっとネガティブに考えすぎですよって言うかもしれません。
But then people might kind of hear this and react like this is a little bit too like kind of a negative way to think about humans. Like I don't know if we can think
人
about
間
them
は
that way.
根本的に良い存在でしょうって言うかもしれません。
Like isn't there just kind of like a fundamental goodness that all humans have?
その答えははい元はねって言います。
And the answer is like, yeah, that's how it originally was made.
でも完全に壊れてるんですよ。
But now like there is this kind of complete brokenness that we
だか
all
ら
have.
人間は もちろんよく漫画とかでありますよね。なんか良い決断するときに悪魔の自分がポッて出てきて、天使の自分がポッて出てきて戦ってるって、なんかそれでよくありますよね。人間2つの特性を持ってる。もちろんそれ正しいです。
And you know, that's kind of like in like the animes or the manga or some shows where it's like somebody has to make a decision, and then the little devil and the little angel pop up on their shoulders, and it's kind of like the two like good and bad versions of yourself, and you have to like make a decision. And in a sense, like to a certain extent, that is kind of true.
でも私たちはちょこっと良くてちょこっと悪いだけじゃないんです。
But it's not that we're like, oh, we have like a little bit of good and a little bit of bad, and we just have to like try hard to make the right choice.
本来は本当に素晴らしきそのように存在として立てられてできてるんだけども、完全に堕落壊れてるんです。
And it's actually more that we were made to actually be completely and perfectly good and amazing, but then because of the fall, we have now become completely broken.
とてつもない良さと、そしてとてつもない悪が存在するわけ
And
です。
so it's actually this crazy, intense like goodness, this perfect goodness, and this crazy intense like just complete brokenness and depravity.
それをどっちかにしようとしたとき、自分の存在が崩れていきます。
And if we try to just like try too hard to go one way or the other, it's just going to fall apart. Like we're not going to be able to actually find our
皆さん
identity.
中国の日本語でなんていうの、陰と陽っていうのかな、陰と円っていうのかな、はいはい、まあいいや、英語で言うと人間ですね。
Do you guys know like the yin and yang kind of ideas of
覚えてます？
from
その
like
中
China?
国のそのカンフーとかでよくね出てくるその黒と白のマガ玉のそのわかります？
It's like the black and white spinny drop thing
あれなんか
from
バランス
Kung
取れて
Fu.
ますよね。
Yeah, so I think a lot of people kind of like are aware of this and kind of have this kind of thinking and stuff.
No, it's a balance ね。There's a
There's
balance.
that balance that it's always in a
でもバラン
cycle.
ス取れてないんです、本当の私たちは。
But I think in real life, like it's not actually there's not actually this balance.
むしろある意味スター・ウォーズの方が正しいです。
It's maybe actually more accurate to say like Star Wars is more
も
kind
ち
of
ろん
fitting.
ジェダイがいます。良い存
You
在。
know, we have like the Jedi, like the good side of the
でも
Force,
ダークサイドのシスたちがいますよ
and then
ね。
there's like the Sith from the dark side of the Force.
でどっちが強いですか？
So like, which one is stronger?
ダークサイドですよ。
It's usually like the dark side is like way stronger
ダーク
actually.
サイドの方が圧倒的に強くて世界を征服してますよね。
Yeah, so it's not just like the good and the bad are kind of at a good balance with each other. It's actually the dark side is like way stronger and actually starting to like dominate the
指輪
whole
物語、
world.
いい奴らはいますよ。
Yeah, and especially like or like in Lord of the Rings, like there's like good guys
フ
in
ロ
that.
ド、めちゃくちゃいいやつですよ。
Yeah, he's like a great guy, Frodo.
でもとてつもない悪が潜んでる。
Yeah, but then there's this kind of like crazy evil that is like just like dwelling within him.
ナルト、いいやつです。
Or like Naruto, he's a great guy.
でもキュービが住んでませんか？
Or like he has some kind of some evil
Monster
within
ね。
monster or something
で、
within
自分
him.
の力ではどうにもできないんです。
Yeah, so like it's something that you can't like just decide to overcome with your own
日
strength.
本人の皆さんそれ分かってるはずです。なんで平社員のビジネスマン、サラリーマンでいるときはいいやついっぱいいますよね。
And I think the Japanese people like they do understand this. Like if you think about like salary men, like just like a standard regular salaryman, there's a lot of them. They're all great guys. They all
で
work
も彼
hard.
らが部長課長になった瞬間にとてつもない嫌なボスになりませんか？
But then like isn't it so common that like as soon as they become like the bucho or like some kind of higher up leader or team leader or something, they just become this really like tyrant type dude.
なぜでしょうか？
Like why did they just
彼らの性
instantly become
格
like
が
that?
変わったんでしょうか？
Did his personality just turn into a different thing
いやいや
instantly?
元からあったものですよ。
It's no, because that was already there the whole time, and it just
日
had a
本
chance to
人
come
は
out.
ただ隠すのがうまいだけなんです。
And I think that the Japanese people are just really good at hiding that.
他の多くの国の人たちはただ自分に正直に自分の悪をさらけ出しない生きてるに過ぎないんです。
And I think a lot of other countries are more direct, and they're very just it's kind of more obvious when that's there. But I think we all have that.
ある意味日本人の方が厄介です。
So I think it's harder for Japanese people because they have this. They're really good at hiding that, and it actually could be more dangerous in that
本当
way.
の悪を見ようとしないから。
And it's because it's harder because you're actually you're not even trying to look at that darkness or that evil that is within you.
戦争が起き、ヒットラーが生まれ、最近のニュースでは自分の赤ん坊をロッカーに捨てていくお母さんたち。
Like there,
悪です。
like there's wars, that there was Hitler, there was the Holocaust, there's all these things. Like recently, even there's women who would they would put their baby in like a locker, and the baby would just die.
アクション映画ではヒーローたちは人間はいいものを持ってるから救うべきだって言いながら、悪役たちは人間はもう堕落して最悪だから滅ぼすべきだ。二人とも両方とも正しいです。
And so, if you think about like especially like action movies, there's like the hero who's like, no, humans like they're good. I have to see the good in them. I need to save them. I need to help them. And then there's like the villain who's like, no, like humans are completely just broken. I just need to wipe them out and start over. And in a sense, they're kind of both right.
そして私たちはジキリとハイドです。
Or it's kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
でも結果的に神なしでは悪に飲み込まれます。
But ultimately, if we don't have God, we're eventually going to kind of lose to this darkness, to this evil.
どうすればいいんでしょうか。
And so then what should we do?
どうしても善をできない私たちどうすればいいんでしょうか。
Like, what should we really do if there's nothing that we can actually do in and of ourselves?
もう一つだけちょっと例え言わせてください。皆さん、ご両親の皆さん、どうやって子供にしつけしますか。
And this is actually kind of a different thing that it's another example that might be helpful is like, especially for parents, like how do you actually discipline your children?
なんて言いますか。嘘をつかせないために何て言います。
Like, what do you say to get them to maybe not lie, for example?
嘘ついたら罰だよ。
You know,
おかしないよ。
if you maybe punish them of like, oh, if you lie, you're going to get punished, you're not going to get candy or something.
それって本当に正しいことをするための動機を使ってますか。いや、恐れです。自分が損したくないからそういう動機づけをしているわけです。
And if you think about it, like what's the actual motivation? Is that the right motivation, or is it just like you have this fear that you're going to lose something if they start lying or something, and you're trying to do it
食
ultimately
器
for
洗いを
yourself?
させるときどういうふうに言ってますか。
Yeah, or if it's like, sorry.
食器洗い washing dishes.
Oh, if
How
you're
do you
washing the
motivate them?
dishes, like what's like kind of like your fundamental motivation for that?
食器洗ったらおやつがあるよ。
It's like, oh, if I wash the dishes, then I will get a candy. I'll get a treat for that.
動機は何でしょうか。自分の利益です。
And so, like, the actual motivation is then for your own benefit.
私たち知らないんです。どうやって本当に純粋に正しいことをしたらいいか。
And so, how can we actually kind of truly and purely do the right thing for the right reason?
それが最後のポイント。どうすればいいんでしょうか。
And that's the third point. Like, what should we do?
ヘブルの2、8から10。ヘブルの著者はこの同じ詩篇の8編を引用してこのように言っています。
This is how it says in Hebrews chapter 2, 8 through 10. It's actually kind of quoting some of the Psalms.
はい、時間がないのでちょっと日本語だけで読みますね。万物を彼の下に置かれました。同じところですね。神は万物を人の下に置かれたとき、彼に従うものも何も残らされませんでした。それなのに今なお私たちはすべてのものが人の下に置かれているのを見ていません。ただ、御使いよりもわずかの間低くされた方、すなわちイエスのことは見ています。イエスは死の苦しみのゆえに栄光と誉れの冠を受けられました。その死は神の恵みによってすべての人のために味わわれたものです。多くの子たちを栄光に導くために彼らの救いの創始者を多くの苦しみを通して完全なものとされたのは万物の存在の目的であり、また原因でもある神にふさわしいことであったのですって言ってるんです。どういうことでしょうか。
So, what is it saying in this passage here?
この世界で唯一本当の人間として生きたのはイエス・キリストだって言ってるんです。
It's basically saying that the only true human who was actually able to live this perfect and complete life was Jesus.
イエス・キリストだけが栄光と誉れの冠を神様にかぶせられるべき人です。
Jesus was the only one who was actually should have been able to receive God's this crowning glory and honor
イエ
and
ス・キ
actually
リストだ
reflect
け
that.
が感情的にも精神的にも全ての面において本当の人間だった人です。
It's basically saying that like Jesus was the only one who was in all of the different ways, like mentally or emotionally or just all of the spiritually, all of these different ways was able to actually fully reflect and should have received this glory from God.
でもイエス・キリストどうなりましたか。
But then what happened to Jesus?
栄光の冠の代わりに茨の冠を受けました。
So instead of a crown of honor, he got a crown of thorns.
神様の友、神様の唯一のパートナーであるのに敵に見なされました。
So instead of being the friend of God, instead of being this kind of perfect companion of God, he was actually then treated as an enemy of God.
唯一正しい人であるのに彼は私たちの罪となりました。
Even though he was the only perfect and good person, he became sin.
そして十字架にかかりました。
And then he was hung on the cross.
悪人として神の敵として裁かれたんです。
And he was judged as one who was evil.
本来だったら私たちがそうなるべきなのに唯一正しい本当の人間、そして本当の神ご自身である方が十字架にかかれて死んでいました。
And like that's what was supposed to happen to us, but then instead this Jesus who is God and man did this in our place.
十字架はまずこういう意味です。福音とはこういう意味です。私たちが十字架を見るときに本当の自分の在り方、人間の性質の一つ目に気づきます。
So there's kind of two things that when we actually look at the cross that we realize, and the first one is just realizing who we truly are as humans.
壊れてる。
how broken we truly
私た
are.
ちの事実、人間としての悪の部分が十字架で見えます。
Just like the reality of all of our own evil is shown on the cross.
でもそれと全く同時に神様にとてつもなく愛されている。神様にとてつもなく素晴らしく見られている。求められているって分かります。
But at the same time, even then we are loved. We can see that from the cross as well.
なぜならそのイエス・キリストの義、イエス・キリストの正しさ、イエス・キリストの命、すべての良いものが私たちに着せられ、与えられ、そういう目で神様に見られているからです。
And it's because through the cross, like all of the ways that Jesus was supposed to be like glorified and given all of this perfect honor and stuff like that is then given to us instead.
先ほど言いましたよね、私たちの心の目を神に向けていなくちゃいけないって言いました。
And as earlier we said, like we need to really orient kind of the eyes of our hearts back towards God, or this mirror of our hearts back towards God.
私たちは神に自分を映し出せなくちゃいけないって言いました。
Like we said that we have to be able to move back towards God.
でも旧約聖書でもそうです。モーゼですら神様を完璧に見れませんでした。雲の中でしか見れませんでした。
Yeah, but even like it says, like especially like in the Old Testament, where like we can't actually completely and perfectly see God. Like for Moses, like it was kind of enshrouded by like clouds
要は
and
いくら
stuff.
私たちで神様を見ようとしても、できない状態なんです。
And so like what the situation that we're in is like no matter how hard we try to put ourselves oriented back towards God, we're not going to be able to completely see Him
でも
perfectly.
イエス・キリストこそがコロサイに書いてあります。神の見姿ご自身。
Yeah, but that's why it says in Colossians, I think we have it that Jesus Himself is this perfect image of God.
人間の本当のイメージ、そして神の本当のイメージ。
Yeah, He's this perfect image of humanity and of God.
イエス・キリストに私たちの心の鏡を向けるときに徐々に自分の姿を取り戻していきます。
Because if we can slowly kind of reorient our hearts back towards Jesus, then that will actually help us to really get us back this original image of God that we were supposed to
そして
reflect.
正直に自分が悪だ、自分が足りないところ、自分が壊れているところも正直に受け入れられます。
And actually, in that way, like we're also then able to accept kind of the like actual how broken we truly were the whole time.
日本人の文化の嫌なところも良いところも同時に見れるようになります。
You know, for example, for Japanese people, they're able to kind of truly and objectively see all of the good and bad aspects of Japanese culture.
客観的に。
And like, or objectively able to see
ア
those
メリカ人
things.
の人たち、自分のポリティカルパーティーの良いところも悪いところも客観的に見れるようになると思い
You
ま
know,
す。
for Americans who are really like the politics, you can really see kind of all of the good points and all of the bad points of your own particular viewpoint
自
in your
分
party.
の宗派の長所も短所も客観的に見れるようになります。
Even just like in like with Christians and like their own kind of the different religious factions and all the congregations and stuff, like you can actually kind of see like the good and the bad points of all of those things.
福音、十字架、イエス・キリストを見ることは一番自分が変わっていく、本当の自分になるための一番実践的、プラクティカルな道です。
And so this kind of road of going back towards orienting your heart back towards Jesus is the actually really practical way to actually grow and to actually fundamentally and objectively see like the good and bad points of where you're coming from.
それをイエス・キリストを見たとき初めて本当の意味で正しいことをでき始めます。恐れていないからもう。
And it's actually when we actually look at Jesus for this first time, it's actually when we're able to, for the first time, actually do this right thing for the right reason. Because we're not like afraid
人に見ら
anymore.
れてるかどうかその感じないです。もう愛されてるから。
Because we don't have to like think like, oh, how are these other people going to think about me? Well, you already know like, oh, I'm completely loved by God, so doesn't matter anymore.
またプライドを作る必要はないです。もうすでに愛され受け入れられてるから自分自身をもう形成してるんです。だから別にプライドを持って自分をよく見せる必要もないんです。
Or like, yeah, I'm already kind of completely just complete in my identity and formed already, so I don't really need to like look for this pride to like build my identity anymore.
本当のリーダーシップ、本当の自分の生き方、本当の使命が分かり始めると思いま
And
す。
it's like when you really start in this time, you really start to kind of understand like your calling, you're like be able to take leadership for the right reasons. You actually understand kind of more like the purpose of your life as well.
はい、コロサイの1の13、15これ読んで終わりにしたいと思います。
And so we want to look at this Colossians passage as well.
13節、御父は私たちを暗闇の力から救い出して愛する御子のご支配の中に移してくださいました。この御子にあって私たちは贖い、すなわち罪の許しを得ているのです。御子は見えない神の形であり、すべての作られたものより先に生まれた方です。
This is chapter 1, 13 through 15. It says, He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation.
イエス・キリストを今から見ていきたいと思います。
So from now, like we really want to just come back and look at Jesus
聖餐式を通して
through communion.